You're watching a special edition of World Talks here on TVP World, direct from Washington at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. I'm Aaron Dahmen.
And I'm Don Arleth. I'd like to introduce our guest today, Paweł Markiewicz, the Executive Director of the Washington office here for the Polish Institute for International Affairs, and Mateusz Piotrowski, U.S. Analyst for International Security at the Warsaw office. Hello to both of you. Thank you for having us and hosting us here in your office.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for the invitation.
Now I'd like to start off. We have these, really big elections. The results are in. We know who the next president will be, but we don't know who will be in the administration. We can only guess. But looking at voters here in the United States, what exactly do you think the main issues were in their minds when choosing a candidate? Was it anything international, or was it only affairs right here at home? Paweł?
Well, based off the exit polls that we saw coming out, during the election, it was clearly, number one, the question of democracy and the understanding of the need to protect democracy and the democratic system here in the United States. And number two was the economy. I thought it was interesting to see that the foreign policy issue was, I think, third or fourth, and it only got about 4%. But on the flip side, I would argue as well that the foreign policy issue was also part of that economic issue. You had candidate Trump at that point saying on multiple occasions that he's going to stop the war in Ukraine because so much U.S. taxpayer dollars is going over there, which could be used here. So I think there's a correlation between also that foreign policy aspect in the Ukrainian context with that the decision of voters when it came to what's good for our economy.
Mateusz, I want to ask you, how do you see the fate of NATO and Trump's attachment to Article 5, which of course is that an attack on one is an attack on all?
I'm not that much afraid of coming Trump to power, that the United States won't come in defense of the allies, but of course his rhetoric saying that he may not come for the allies that are not paying enough for their security, meaning those 2% of GDP or even more if Trump will call for that. This is a dangerous rhetoric, the rhetoric that may try to push Russia to test the limits of the US commitment to the allies. So in one way, I'm not afraid of Trump in power as a most important ally in NATO, but on the other hand, those rhetoric may help with other countries to invest more in their own defense, but also may have a negative impact on policy of Russia. I mean, for there probably it's a positive impact on Russia, but for allies it's a negative thing.
Well, it seems like the dust is settling, and there's a really spicy rhetoric on the campaign trail. But do you think that Donald Trump will, follow up with all of his promises that he ran on, the platform that he ran on during the campaign?
I mean, if looking at that the Senate is Republican, House probably will be as well. That's how it looks for the moment. It would be easier to give these promises to the people to bring it to life. But we know politics, not only American politics, but politics in general. It's not only about bringing every promise from the campaign trail to the life. So there may be some limitations, not because of the institutions of the U.S. or something like that, or the deep state that he very often calls, but just no longer a political will on his own side or his allies' side to bring some proposals. For example, I can think about tariffs on trade. I mean, he very strongly said about bringing 10%, 20% even tariffs on products that will be imported to the United States. But it will have impact on the U.S. economy, not a good one. And at the end, with people like Robert Lighthizer coming to the administration, probably he may end up with thinking that this was not a good idea. This was just a campaign proposal, not a real policy that he will try to pursue.
Paweł, we've seen a number of European leaders in recent days congratulate Donald Trump, even though those that may have preferred Kamala Harris as president. What strategy do you think European leaders will take with Mr. Trump, and what strategy do you think they should take with someone like him?
Well, I think they're going to try to show their best side and their best face forward. A good start is, what they did, congratulating him on the phone calls. reaching out to him directly, extending the hand of cooperation. I think they understand that this Trump administration will be in some ways similar to the previous Trump administration, meaning that a lot of the relationship that the United States under Donald Trump 2.0 is going to have is going to be at the bilateral level, so country to country instead of US to EU level. And they recognize that, and I think these are kind of steps that they're taking to begin that process of showing that they're willing to work with the United States, willing to work with the Trump administration to continue building on the relationship that the US had with many of these countries, in order to not kind of fall in the crosshairs of Donald Trump, so to speak.
Following up on what you mentioned there, talking about the fact that it could be similar to his first term, one of the key fundamentals of foreign policy is often predictability. Good foreign policy is predictable. Donald Trump is unpredictable. How concerning do you think that is for Europe?
Well, I mean, there is certainly that concern, right? He's a person that, as you mentioned, he's unpredictable. He has a huge ego when it comes to himself and the way that he's, runs the government and things along those lines. So certainly there is that element of unpredictability within him. But I also think if we take a look at the world that he's coming into or that he'll step into in January 2025, it's a different world as well, right? You have Russia, China working more closely together. You have North Korea also in that mix now, sending troops to Ukraine. You have Iran that's kind of in that axis of evil as well. So I think that his approach, he'll have to come to terms with this on the one hand and go through a little bit of a new learning process. I think he's someone that's also matured in a sense that he understands the mechanisms that work in Washington now. In his first term, he kind of didn't. So he's going to have to take a new approach to a lot of what's going on in the world, looking at it in this new lens and new context.
And if I may add, the unpredictability in the US policy, of course, brings harder times to allies and partners, of course, but it also brings harder times for the US rivals, China and Russia, on top.
And it seems that this unpredictability can also, it can get things done. If we look at the NATO spending in Europe, right, it seems like many leaders this year were hedging what was going to happen, right? And Europe has reached, 26 countries that are spending the 2%. So is Donald Trump going to get them to spend more and take care of more of their own security issues in Europe?
Well, I think that's something that we'll certainly hear. Those types of comments that Donald Trump makes, whether it's, truant allies and partners not spending enough on defense, or it's Europe's trying to undermine U.S. interests with this economic rivalry. Those are kind of his key, they're easy talking points for him, right? He can always go back to those talking points. I certainly think that he'll continue to emphasize that, it's important for these allies to invest in their defense. And he may use some kind of a carrot and stick method, right? Saying that, well, if you don't invest in this, then, there'll be less U.S. involvement in Europe. So it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility. It'll be interesting to see if he begins to also pressure these allies to start spending even more, right? 3%, maybe even 4%. That'll be interesting to see if he wields that kind of lever on a lot of these European partners and allies that, as you mentioned, some have contributed much more, but they're still not there yet.
Speaking of some of the levers he might use, I mean, Donald Trump is regarded very much as a transactional operator. Can that have strengths in foreign policy, or does that miss the nuance of what foreign policy is?
Well, I certainly think that it can work in a beneficial way if it's done right, probably. He likes to be, or he wants to be the person that makes the big deal, whether it comes to, for example, solving the Russia-Ukraine war, or coming to some kind of terms with China. I think he's going to be looking for that. And the problem that might occur, at least that I can kind of see, is what he'd give up in order to get, that deal, right? Where that pitfall could be. Certainly it might not take into consideration, who's at stake, right? It could be something that gets whispered to him at the last minute by one of his advisors. He said, that's a great idea, we're doing it, right? So there is still that kind of unpredictability when it comes to that transactionalism, but I think if it's done right, it can work.
Mateusz, the war in Ukraine, it's been more than 24 hours since Donald Trump got elected, and the war still continues in Ukraine. How do you think Donald Trump is going to go about trying to put an end to the killing there and this brutal war?
I don't think that there is a possibility because of the institutions that he may end this war before becoming formally a US president, not the president-elect. But he may start the talks with Russia, with Ukraine separately when he is the president-elect. I believe that Ukraine even will try to influence President Trump before his inauguration on January 2020. So this process may start even in the coming days, actually. But how it will go, this is the other thing, like Paweł said a little about it, what Russia will try to push. Because I do believe that when Putin will try to negotiate, and I do believe that Putin will try to negotiate with Donald Trump, even coming first to the table, he will not only talk about the Ukraine, he will talk about a lot more about NATO, about the nuclear power of the United States and Europe. Many things, showing also that Ukraine is just a small little thing on the table that we want to try to talk with the US. If he plays too big, if he will try to play too much with Donald Trump, there is a possibility that there won't be any peace, any settlement between the Russia and the United States, and that Donald Trump may just withdraw from the negotiations. If it will take weeks, even months. But on the other hand, there is a possibility if it goes the way that the United States wants it to go. I don't know the details, of course. And the Russia, if it will achieve some goals that it wants to, the Ukraine may be pushed for example, accepting the Russian annexation of Crimea. For example, security guarantees. I don't know if from the United States, the more possibility I see to the United States bringing the European allies to give those security guarantees on the bilateral relations, even bringing the European troops to Ukraine, for example, from France, if already President Macron said that he might do something like that.
Territorial concessions, I mean, the redrawing of borders, the occupied territories in Ukraine, do you think that's on the negotiating table?
I mean, it may be. It's something that the Russia definitely wants. I mean, I'm not saying it's a good idea. Definitely not. In the short term, it may work to stop the war, sure, or maybe the armed conflict, not the war itself. But on the medium term, especially the long term, it will push Russia to try for more. Maybe in Georgia, maybe in NATO to attack the Baltic states and see if what will happen now. If the war brought us the new territories, maybe we can try with NATO, and we will see that the Article 5 is not working. I don't want to actually see this outcome, but I'm not saying it's a good idea. It's not. But from what I hear here in Washington, it's that it's on the table. It may be on the table. It's not like a perspective that is not negotiable.
And just lastly, when we look at the situation here in the US, the Senate, the House, seeing a really Republican red swing, how critical is it that Donald Trump surrounds himself with people that can tell him bad news, that can tell him how it is instead of what he wants to hear? And by extension, how important is that Secretary of State appointment for Europe?
Oh yeah, it will be. The appointment will have a lot of impact. Who will take the portfolio of Secretary of State and all the undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, especially for Europe. So it will be the most important. Like Paweł said, the last person who says to the President Trump maybe the most influencing one. So this portfolio of Europe with having allies around Trump. I mean, this administration in person will be very much different from the first administration. We may see some comebacks like Robert O'Brien, for example, maybe Mike Pompeo, Richard Grenell. We will see. Some are better news, some are worse news in details. But it's gonna be there won't be people like, for example, Jim Mattis from the first administration. I mean, hard stoppers on some radical thinking. So this is that idea, and it's not just it's not a good news for Europe itself.
Well, Mateusz Piotrowski and Paweł Markiewicz from the Polish Institute of International Affairs, thank you, gentlemen, for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
And that's this special edition of World Talks here on TVP World. Do stay with us. Goodbye for now.